The Supreme Court has ended the Biden administration's COVID-related ban on evictions.
A major Supreme Court decision on voting rights. The conservative majority upholding two Arizona voting.
The first major gun rights case the Supreme Court has taken up in more than a decade. This is likely because
abortion rights will face landmark arguments before the Supreme Court.
In the words of the Reverend and activist Martin Luther King Jr.,
"The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice."
It has not bent towards justice all on its own. It has bent because of the choices we make and the actions we take.
Knew that freedom would be secure only if each generation thought to renew and enlarge its meaning.
If we make mistakes, we must be willing to admit them.
The previous administration moved us further from justice, temporarily. But we are here today, using the justice system itself to undo the damage and to move us boldly forward. In under 1 year, President Biden has confirmed more judicial nominees than any president since Nixon because of groups like the Alliance for Justice and the coalition that we have built. Why? Because a fair judiciary and fearless advocacy is critical to rolling back the injustices we now face.
Never before have we had a nominee display such flagrant partisanship and open hostility.
We will never give up. We will never give up.
Since 1979, AFJ has been the leader in advocating for a fair and independent justice system, preserving access to the courts, especially for those most underrepresented. With your help, AFJ can keep fighting to ensure that President Biden and Senate Democrats fill every single judicial vacancy by 2022. Vacancies filled by nominees strongly in favor of preserving people's constitutional rights. AFJ's Boldly Forward campaign is dedicated to protecting all of our rights. Rights we are guaranteed. Rights that define the idea of America.
When you see something that is not right, not fair, not just, say something, do something, get in trouble, good trouble, necessary trouble.
To support the campaign, please visit afj.org. With your help, we will continue bending the arc towards justice.
Hey everybody, and thank you for joining us this evening at the Alliance for Justice's Boldly Forward Annual Gala in tribute to AFJ's former president, Aron. I'm DeRay Mckesson, a civil rights activist focused primarily on issues of policing and criminal justice, issues that I know are dear to many people's hearts who are here. And I think I'm in the right place. I'm honored to be your host this evening, and this is an evening dedicated to advancing justice through bold actions. And an evening dedicated to honoring a particularly bold individual, the former president of AFJ, Aron. Now, many of us in this room know Nan personally. But whether you know Nan personally or not, you actually know her work because you've been positively impacted by her life's work. In founding AFJ, Nan understood something that a lot of people hadn't yet caught on to, but that people get today, that the most effective way to reform the deep failures of our justice system is through the courts themselves. And importantly, the way to reform the courts is to make sure that the judges who are appointed are fair and impartial. There are a lot of people that don't understand the role that the courts play, but Nan understood it before a lot of people did. And before she founded AFJ, she was at the ACLU's National Prison Project leading there, working around conditions in state prisons and around lawsuits in federal and state courts. Under Nan's leadership, AFJ became the premier organization raising awareness of the critical importance of the federal judiciary and nonprofit advocacy. Today, AFJ is leading the effort to ensure that the Biden administration prioritizes filling judicial seats. So we've got some important work to do, and there's no one better to talk about what needs to get done or how to get it done than founder and chair of Fair Fight Action, Stacey Abrams. In many circles, Stacey, along with her organization Fair Fight, is known for flipping Georgia. I know Stacey because she's been a tireless advocate for her entire career, and there's no one better to help us understand it than her. Thank you for all you've done, Stacey, and welcome.
Good evening. Thank you, DeRay, for that introduction. Tonight, we honor AFJ's founder and President Emeritus, Aron, and we celebrate AFJ's continuing work under President Rakim Brooks. Our nation's legal foundation hangs in the balance as ideologues on the court strip away our rights. Democracy depends on the rule of law, and when that is threatened from the bench, we are all in jeopardy. And yet AFJ and its 130 affiliate organizations give voice and power to communities most at risk to an unfair justice system. AFJ's fight for a fair and equitable judiciary is synchronous with the fight to protect our democracy. And as we push for passage of the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, AFJ advocates for federal judges who value the freedom to vote. It's through a fair judiciary that we will ultimately ensure access to democracy for all Americans. And Nan Aron's dedication to a legal system worthy of its people has been a guiding light. She has challenged our notions of leadership, fostered diversity as a truth rather than a theory, and shepherded in courage while others cowered in fear. She and AFJ understood that we can dismantle the systems that hold us back and create a more equitable, more just nation for us all. Nan, thank you for your leadership and your stewardship.
To all of our guests, a hearty and warm welcome. As you are by now aware, I am Rakim Brooks, the second president of the Alliance for Justice in our 42-year history. It is with an abiding sense of humility and awe that I assume this position. As I've joked with others, Nan's shoes don't quite match the depth or breadth of her footprint. We're so grateful to her for all that she has contributed these past 4 decades. Thank you, Nan. What I hope to do tonight in my introduction to AFJ is to give you all a sense of who I am, why I believe in the Alliance for Justice and our work, and then to tell you what I believe is required of all of us now if we are going to win back our courts and our democracy. So first, who am I? I grew up in East Harlem in the Robert F. Wagner houses. For those of you who are familiar with Pleasant Avenue from The Godfather or Carlito's Way, 2 of my favorite movies, Wagner houses starts at 120th Street, just where Pleasant Avenue ends. I grew up there with my grandmother and my mother, until my mother found her first apartment in the South Bronx, where I would then spend many of my weekends. But during the week, it was me and Grandma. My grandmother was hobbled by blindness and ill health early in my life. But rather than that being a burden, growing up with her turned out to be the greatest blessing of my life. My grandmother dedicated every ounce of herself into making what she called a gentleman. She wanted me to be well-read, intelligent, respectful, and above all things, committed to what was right, to have integrity. I'll let you decide if she succeeded in every respect, but what I can say is that I rise each day with an aching sense that justice and fairness and humility still must count for something. Indeed, in today's world, as our democracy teeters, our commitment to those values may be the only thing capable of saving us. When I decided to go to law school, I did so because I wanted with every ounce of myself to fight poverty with the law. I wanted to go to the root of the problem, which is to say I wanted to constitutionalize poverty and to say once and for all that in a nation as rich as ours, poverty was not just unfortunate, but unconstitutional. Then I arrived at Yale Law School and discovered that in a case called San Antonio Independent School District versus Rodriguez, the Supreme Court had effectively dashed my dreams over 4 decades ago. Simply put, the court had held that poverty was not unconstitutional, that it was all right for the poor school children in San Antonio, like so many of my friends and family growing up, to receive an inferior education because of where and to whom they were born. And by extension, that it was all right that my grandmother, who gave me everything that she had, that it was all right that she was forced to choose between life-saving medication, food, and a place to call home. More than that, it was all right with our Constitution, the United States Constitution, if people who worked their entire lives crumble in despair as they age because there just wasn't enough to make ends meet, let alone save. All of this, that Supreme Court said, was beside the Constitution's point in a famous 5-4 decision. I'd like to tell you that when I read that case, my back stiffened. I set my shoulders back for the battle ahead. But that would be a lie. I felt dejected and betrayed. And that sense of betrayal would only deepen as I watched Eric Garner murdered without any consequence. I'm old enough to remember vividly the murder of Amadou Diallo, who was shot 41 times by New York City police officers, and young enough to still feel the fresh sting of the acquittal of those officers 20 years ago. So in all honesty, I was ready to be done with America, with her false promises of equality, freedom, and dignity for all people. Because for all my success, from public housing to Oxford, as the New York City Housing Journal once said, I still believe that justice starts with the least of us, and that by that measure, America is unjust. Then something fortuitous happened. Going to a fancy law school has its advantages after all, mainly that you get to meet some really inspiring people. For me, that was Justice Edwin Cameron of the Constitutional Court of South Africa. Justice Cameron was and is a true freedom fighter and a member of his nation's founding generation. An openly gay man living with HIV, a white man of Afrikaner descent, Justice Cameron has spent his entire life championing the cause of justice, first by fighting apartheid, then challenging homophobia, AIDS denialism, and internalized stigma, and then any number of other causes. He is quite simply a champion for human rights in South Africa and everywhere. My time in his chambers left me with distinct memories, perhaps none more important than when he named plainly for me that America, my country, was still struggling with vicious white supremacy, and that the battle would not soon be won. He said it so casually that if I'd not been listening closely, I might have missed it. Indeed, I thought I'd misheard him. I thought he was talking about South Africa. And then he repeated himself about America and adding that South Africa, with its dazzling constitution, was still struggling to be free. So he said, I must be prepared that winning some battles only results in fighting others. For some reason, that clarity did stiffen my back. And so I returned home ready to plant my feet and run this race for as long as I'm able. And that's what brings me to the Alliance for Justice. When I joined the board of the Alliance 2 years ago, it was because I believed passionately that our democracy would never live up to its full potential without a progressive judiciary. And that meant that I made the difficult decision to leave the ACLU and join the fight here at AFJ. Let me say something then about the struggle for fairness and justice that I believe lies ahead. For all that the Alliance has done for over these 40 years to fight against the takeover of our courts, we must candidly admit that as a movement, we have fallen far short of where we had hoped we would be. And in some respects, we failed. We are at our lowest point in our 40-year struggle. The court is stacked with young, energetic conservatives who make John Roberts, author of Shelby County, Parents Involved, the man who struck down the Medicaid expansion, yes, that John Roberts, seem moderate. So there are indeed tough days ahead. The Texas abortion case is revealing, but really only the beginning. So what are we to do? I'm reminded of the Churchill quote that there's only one thing to do when you're going through hell, and that's to keep going. If we are indeed at the bottom, then I say to you that perhaps there's good reason to be cheery, because the only way out is up. The conservative movement has had its moment, and I now believe that it is very much our turn. At Nan's going away party, I said to our guests that we would remember that moment because it was Nan's voice that had called us to gather at that place for this cause. And tonight I say that we're gathered at this time, right now, to carry on the work that she started and to see it done, because so much depends on it. Women's health depends on it. The fate of refugees and racial justice depends on it. The land that nourishes our prosperity, the people whose hands are necessary to do the work of America, depend on our recommitting to this work this evening. Please join us. As the late, great Ruth Bader Ginsburg once said, real change, enduring change happens one step at a time. We are ready. I am ready to make that change happen.
Thank you, Rakim. We are so thrilled to be a part of AFJ's work as AFJ thinks about what happens in the next phase of American life. Now, our next panel, When There Are Nine, speaks to some of the current work before the Supreme Court. There's a lot going on, and there are a lot of things to talk about, none more important than the court's recent decision to effectively overturn Roe in Texas by allowing the state's Republican-backed law banning abortions after 6 weeks of pregnancy to go into effect. It reflects just how deeply lawless and hyper-partisan the Supreme Court's conservative majority is today. It's because the court's conservative justices do not reflect the diversity of our country racially, economically, or in terms of lived experience. These are reactionary justices who have spent most of their lives inside of a bubble, who don't even understand the issues or the way justice is supposed to look in community. When Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg was asked when there would be enough women on the Supreme Court, she famously replied, "When there are nine." There have been 9 white men on the court. There have never been 9 women, 9 people of color, 9 women of color. This panel is an opportunity to look at the court, how it's made decisions without transparency and gutted states and individual rights, and what we should do about it. Please welcome Elie Bazelon, a staff writer for the New York Times Magazine and co-host of Slate's Political Gabfest, who will be moderating tonight's panel. Welcome, Elie.
Thank you, DeRay. I am so looking forward to this discussion about some of the questions that have been on my mind so much about the Supreme Court over the last several months. There is just a fabulous array of people here to delve into these questions. And first, I just want to start by thanking Alliance for Justice for putting this event together, and to say a big thank you to Nan Aron, who has been a force of nature in Washington, D.C. for more than 40 years. I have known Nan for what feels like my whole life. To say that she will be missed is just an understatement. And I just want to honor all of the effort and energy she has expended over this long tenure. So to introduce our panel, our first panelist is Elie Mystal, who is the justice correspondent for The Nation. He covers the courts, the criminal legal system, and politics. Elie is a graduate of Harvard College and Harvard Law School, and you can see him all the time, if you're lucky, on MSNBC. Our second panelist is Chris Hayes, who is the host of All In with Chris Hayes on MSNBC. Chris also serves as the editor-at-large of The Nation, where he's been contributing since 2007. He's a former fellow at Harvard University's Edmund J. Safra Foundation Center for Ethics. And our third wonderful panelist is Michele Goodwin. Michele is the Chancellor's Professor of Law at the University of California, Irvine, and the host of a popular podcast, On the Issues with Michele Goodwin, at Ms. Magazine. She's published 6 books, more than any of the rest of us, I think, and more than 100 articles, essays, book chapters, and commentaries. She's been published or featured in places like the Harvard Law Review, the New York Times, Ms. Magazine, and Politico. So welcome to all of you. Michele, I'm hoping you can kick things off for us. And I want to start with the topic that I think is weighing heavily on many people's minds as they think about the Supreme Court. And that is the future of Roe versus Wade and people's constitutional right to access to abortion. DeRay mentioned that the future of a Texas law that imposes a near ban on abortion after 6 weeks is looming before the court. That is also true about a near ban at 15 weeks from Mississippi. And Michele, you know, the sort of big overarching question here is about whether the Supreme Court is about to effectively or actually overturn Roe, what a more kind of incremental decision could look like, and just where you think this is going to go. We have a new dominant conservative majority on the court, but on this particular question, as a group of 6, they are untested. So what do you think is going to happen and why?
Well, tested and untested. We got a bit of a preview in the Texas case when the Supreme Court had the opportunity to intervene, and that is to say to allow the district court to finish its review or just simply allow for the law to not go into effect through its shadow docket opinion, which basically was 1 page unsigned, so we still don't know which justice actually wrote that opinion. The Supreme Court effectively allowed the law to go in place. And since that time, there's been a bit of civil procedure gymnastics that's taken place in Texas, which was the purposeful design of the law itself. But if we actually take a page from that particular case, it's important to note that even Chief Justice John Roberts, who is not necessarily a friend or fan of reproductive health rights and justice, dissented in this case. Now, what's clear is that his dissent, at least in terms of counting balls and strikes, does not matter with a group of 5 that can carry an ideological bent against abortion rights to a vote that suppresses or oppresses reproductive health and rights. And it's important to note that when we look at this cast of 5, it includes people who both publicly, outside of their judiciary roles, and also on the court have articulated strong stances against
reproductive health and rights and justice. So that includes Alito, that includes Thomas. Kavanaugh, we see that from the DC District Court. We saw that from Gorsuch when he was previously on the 10th Circuit. And then the real card will be Amy Coney Barrett, but she told us from the Rose Garden at the White House that she sees herself in the vein of Justice Scalia. Scalia was not a fan of reproductive rights and justice. So, we still don't know, right? We're not bringing a Ouija board to this, but at the same time, there are indications from past jurisprudence with these very justices that should cause us all alarm.
Elie, I would love for you to pick it up from there. Are you alarmed?
I'm totally alarmed, but not exactly about SB8. Look, SB8 is terrible with the bounty hunting but among friends, I think we can all admit that SB8 is a little bit weird. It's a little bit kind of out of left field. It's got some weird standing issues. I still think, call me naive, I still think that there's a good chance that eventually, when we get to a ruling on the merits, that this Supreme Court will strike it down. The problem is Dobbs. The problem is Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health. The problem is the Mississippi law that bans abortion at 15 weeks, that the court was already slated to pick up before Texas acted a fool, that is going to be argued on December 1st. And that is the case that I believe the conservatives have designed to strike down Roe. Of course, they won't actually say we're striking down Roe, because if they said that, people might notice, hey, who are these unelected justices taking away? No, they're not going to say they're going to strike down Roe. They're going to move the line from fetal viability, which is where it is in Roe and Planned Parenthood v. Casey. They're going to move that back to 15 weeks, call it not an undue burden, because 15 weeks, women can still figure out how to get an abortion. And so it's not an undue burden on their right to choose. And then the conservatives can still say, oh man, yeah, we got this victory, but Roe's still a thing, so give me money to stop the baby Holocaust. And Democrats, centrist Democrats, can still say, hey, Roe's still a thing. What do we got to do? Why are you asking me? We're fine. Like, that's my fear of what the Supreme Court's going to do.
Let me just quickly pick up on that, Emily, to what Elie is saying. This has been a death by 1,000 strikes. But let's also be clear about the evolution of conservatives on this question within the context of the court, because there are some that would say, well, look, this has always been the Republican point of view. And that would be absolutely incorrect. In 1973, in Roe v. Wade, that's a 7-2 decision. 5 of those 7 justices are Republican appointed. We've got Justice Blackmun, who writes the opinion in Roe v. Wade, and he's Nixon appointed. Nobody's challenging Nixon's Republican bona fides. The same is true 20 years later in Planned Parenthood v. Casey, a case that significantly O'Connor and Kennedy play a pivotal role, both Republican appointed. So what we see today in terms of the Supreme Court and the ideology coming about is what would have been described 50 years ago as absolutely fringe.
Yeah, and I think it's also, what's striking about that point is that it's precisely those traumas that produced the modern assembly line to make sure that the next justices that are appointed are going to be right on this. That's what we've watched develop, obviously, after O'Connor and Kennedy and Souter, and we have come to the point that was 20 years in the making, and part of what's so maddening, of course, the discourse around all this with both the court declining to enjoin the Texas law despite its sort of procedural preposterousness, and also Amy Coney Barrett coming from the court be like, who, me? Abortion? Never really thought of it. I don't know. Like, what are you talking about? Like, all of this nonsense that we all know what's going on. We all know the subtext. And to Elie's point, I do think, like, I'm not a lawyer and I'm not a legal expert here, but I do think the politics matter here. And I actually thought the Roberts dissent on the procedural motion on the SB8 was interesting. I think it also was interesting to conceive of the politics of the decision should it come, to Elie's point about whether they explicitly strike down Roe, and also where Roberts ends up on that. Because I think that he is, almost more than anyone on the court, certainly more than anyone on the court, extremely attuned to the political ramifications, to the legitimacy of the court, yada, yada, yada.
He's the Chief Justice.
Yes. Yeah. You're right. It's his role, but I also think he's really a creature of the sort of Republican Party in a lot of ways. I guess Kavanaugh is too, but I think it'll be interesting to see how they do that, because I do think, like, look, the politics of this issue are complicated, and the polling on this issue is complicated. One of the things that is a robust and constant finding is that people like Roe. They like that is a pretty consistent finding across polls over time, over wording. Like, that result happens, and I don't think Sam Alito cares one way or the other about that. In some ways, it's not his job to care, but I do think Roberts cares, and I think that we'll see how that plays in. I also think the last thing I'll say is the fact that they're so tetchy right now on the court about criticism between Alito, like, giving his speech against Adam Serwer's piece in The Atlantic precisely on the court's decision not to enjoin SB 8, Amy Coney Barrett appearing at the McConnell Center in Louisville next to Mitch McConnell to claim that she is not a hack and has no political affiliation. They are aware of what is the incoming. They are aware of the perception. They're aware of the polling that has shown their legitimacy and approval at an all-time low. And I think that factors in too. Now, it's not just positive anyway, but it's present.
Oh, no, absolutely. And let me just close out with this, right? So we can see that Roberts has cared about the legitimacy of the court even before the recent dissent. In June Medical v. Rousseau, we get to see a hint of that, of Roberts trying to save the court, or at least save the reputation of the court before SB 8 in another abortion case that just 2 years ago, where the state of Louisiana tries to stand down the Supreme Court, basically saying, well, we can pass the same kind of law that you've just struck down 2 years ago. And I think a lot has to do with the Trump administration calling out Obama justices, et cetera, and Roberts having to stand up, right, and saying there's no such thing as Obama judges, justices, Bush justices, et cetera. So this has long been on his mind. It's a great question, and I think Elie and both you, Chris, really great commentary on it.
Okay, so that is an excellent segue to our next question. I want to dig into what is going on here with justices like Justice Barrett and also Justice Breyer, and I suppose in his own way, Justice Alito really trying to defend the court against criticism. So the context here is the court's declining public approval rating. I think a year and a half ago, it was at 58%, which is like around the sort of 60% high water mark that we've seen for the last 20 or 25 years. It's since dropped to 40%, which I think is an all-time low since Gallup has been keeping track. What, Elie, do you think is going on here with the justices' pushback? Are they making exactly the kinds of remarks about how the court is nonpartisan that they kind of always make? Does it feel less credible than usual to you? Is there this sort of intrusion of realism that they just kind of can't resist talking about? What do you make of what's happening here?
Well, I want to roll the tape all the way back. Let's go Federalist 78. Alexander Hamilton says that the Supreme Court is the least dangerous branch of government. Now, Hamilton was wrong. Hamilton was, Aaron Burr ain't gonna shoot me level wrong, right, about this idea. But why did he say that? Well, because the court has no money and the court has no army. And Hamilton's thought, again, completely wrong, but Hamilton's thought was that the court would never get too far out ahead of the political institutions, because they would pull the court back, given that the political institutions, Congress and the president, actually have powers that the court doesn't, right? Fast forward all the way to our present day, and what we see is that the political institutions have put upon the court the charge to do these massively unpopular things that they cannot get done through the normal political process. You could not pass a bill through Congress banning Roe v. Wade. You couldn't get it done. You couldn't pass a bill through Congress eliminating gun laws, eliminating gun permitting, which is what also the court is going to do. You couldn't pass a law through Congress eliminating the Voting Rights Act. All of these things are critical things to the functioning of our democracy and the distribution of our rights and responsibilities, and Congress has given that over to the Supreme Court to handle it. Well, once you do that, of course, people are going to start kind of looking at the Supreme Court a little bit differently and criticizing the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is the least transparent, but also the least understood branch of government. It's the least covered branch of government. One of the reasons that I like Nan, since that's what we're talking about, is that she has spent her entire career trying to bring this, clandestine branch of government to light. Not necessarily for, left-right politics, but just so people understand. Because if people could just understand what the court does, they wouldn't like it so much. They wouldn't like unelected, unaccountable, lifetime appointed judges deciding for them what rights they have and which acts of Congress are legal or not. They don't like it. And what we're seeing today is the proof of that pudding. When the Supreme Court has it put upon them to decide these issues outside of our political process, the people disagree.
So one thing that's really interesting about that critique is that, historically there have been moments, throughout our history, before the Civil War, after the Civil War, particularly involving race.
That's what I'm thinking, Emily.
What? Sorry?
I said that's what I'm thinking.
Right? We've seen the court take the country backwards at other moments. And yet, I think largely because of the role that the Warren Court played in the 1960s in a way that a lot of liberals favor. Liberals often look to the Supreme Court to defend the rights of minorities. They see its judicial supremacism, its expressions of power, or they have seen as a kind of positive force in American life. You were painting a very different and darker picture, Elie, and I wonder, Michele and Chris, in that historical context, what you think about the court shifting role.
Well, it also says a lot about the arc and evolution of the Constitution actually doing the work that it was intended to do in the lives of people of color, in the lives of women. So you're absolutely right, Emily, to say that, well, look, we could look at cases like Dred Scott, where Chief Justice Roger Taney says that Black people were never intended to have any status above property in what we have as the United States. And for him, that was the vision. Or Prigg, when the Supreme Court upholds fugitive slave laws and striking down states' laws that would say, hey, if you're Black and you make it to our state, you're going to be free. The Supreme Court playing an active role in that. Or we could look at the history of jurisprudence, which has been absolutely barbaric and arcane with regard to women, right? There's the vestiges of it all happens to be there. But what we've also seen over time, not always through federal legislation or through state law, sometimes anything other than that, social movements and people coming into their own, people of color being able to actually make their way through colleges and schools, women doing that so too, able to be empowered and such then to be able to speak clearly about the gaps in the court, right? It says a lot about whose voices matter. And I think that's part of the point of your second question, Emily, because over time, it turns out that the court hasn't been great. You look at 1927 and Buck v. Bell, where the United States Supreme Court upholds a eugenics law out of Virginia that becomes the model for the Nazis' eugenics law. Not so great. Korematsu, not so great. But I think now there is a different standard that folks want to hold the court to. And you're right. It doesn't look in any way the way in which the Warren Court did.
I mean, I guess I think there's sort of a charitable way to interpret all the caterwauling and an uncharitable way to interpret it. And I tend towards the latter, but just to give the argument for the former, like, look, I think you could make the case that if you survey the institutional landscape of American democracy at this moment in the 21st century, like it's in pretty rough shape. You have, essentially, you just had essentially the first violent interruption of the transfer of power happen since arguably the cannons firing in Fort Sumter in the wake of Lincoln's inauguration. Like, you've got this sort of brewing authoritarian cult that has essentially come to take over one of the two major parties that clearly is antagonistic towards the rule of law and democracy. And in that landscape, it's important to have some kind of like repository of widespread authority, legitimacy, and reputational capital that can issue a decree like the election result was X. And that the court is worried about, and I think across the ideological spectrum, that people in the court are worried about the ability to project that authority when essentially the time comes for it, when it's like the break glass moment of the constitutional crisis. And so that I think is the charitable view of it. I mean, the uncharitable view is like, nothing drives me more insane than what I find to be the sort of tendentious bad faith of particularly the right, I think, on this with the balls and strike stuff. This, oh shucks, like us, like me, the guy who just had dinner with Leonard Leo, like what about me? I don't have any politics. Like I do think that has been harder to maintain in this era for a bunch of reasons. One, the structural polarization that's playing on the country. Two, like when you get up next to Donald Trump with Ruth Bader Ginsburg not even in the ground, everyone, people are going to understand what's going on. So I think like from the Merrick Garland situation through the fact that 3 justices are confirmed by this guy who loses the popular vote, including the last one right up to the deadline, like that is going to have an effect, at least on one big chunk of how the country, which was the chunk, I think, to your point, Emily, and to yours, Michele, like more disposed to have sort of positive views. Like, I don't think that those people, and I'm speaking here broadly, the center, left, and liberals, are as disposed to have those positive views given what we've just gone through.
I mean, I think that the reason why we know that the charitable view is not the view that the current justices have is that if that's what they thought, the people they would be angry at are not Adam Serwer, they'd be angry at Mitch McConnell. Because Mitch McConnell was the one who broke it. Mitch McConnell was the one who refused to give Merrick Garland a hearing. Mitch McConnell was the one who installed Amy Coney Barrett before Ruth Bader Ginsburg was in the ground. Quite frankly, if those 2 justices, if Gorsuch and Barrett were concerned about legitimacy, they would have told him no. They would have said, no, I do not want my entire career sullied by your partisan hackery. Get away from me. Instead, we've got Amy Coney Barrett sitting, at the McConnell Center talking about how she's not a partisan hack in the most partisan hackish way. But I also want to say, like, when we think about overall the legitimacy of the Supreme Court, we cannot let it pass that what we're seeing right now, to get back to the first question that was asked to Michele, what we're seeing right now is 2 of the 5 votes to take away women's reproductive rights are being supplied by men who have been credibly accused of sexual misconduct. When you think about the legitimacy of the institution, you cannot separate out that from the allegations about Clarence Thomas, which I am thinking of because he just passed his 30-year anniversary of confirmation, and the confirmation hearing of Merrick Garland, where this man was credibly accused of attempted rape, credibly accused of
Brett Kavanaugh. Sorry, Elie. Confirmation hearing of Brett Kavanaugh.
Of Kavanaugh, credibly accused of assault, credibly accused of perjury, credibly accused of having disappearing debts, and his alibi was a calendar whose chain of custody was him and his dad. Like that, like you can't get around that kind of that issue when you think about why doesn't the public respect the Supreme Court as much as it used to.
And could I just add on to that, Emily, that as we think about this, it's really important that we understand that we're not talking about just the Supreme Court. When you think about the power of the federal courts or state courts, I mean, Donald Trump, while he was in office, was able to nominate and then get through, with the help of Mitch McConnell, more federal judges than any other president save George Washington. And in the space of all of that, not one Black person on the federal courts of appeal. Right? I mean, it is also very draconian to just look just the substance of what happened and who now serves on the court. I mean, the very fact that the ABA process of vetting was pretty much disregarded, and there are reports of some of these judges as being unqualified to sit pretty much ignored, and then something else that relates fundamentally to what you've asked us to think about. 2 cases that over the course of the last 40 or 50 years have been important questions to ask the people who sit before the Senate. Brown v. Board of Education and the legitimacy of that case, and Roe v. Wade. And in this particular period with the Trump nominated judges, we saw people saying, I don't know, I can't actually say that Brown was rightly decided or that I would support that opinion. That was stunning.
I want to move us to this sort of big looming question about the future of the court. So the Alliance for Justice supports expanding the number of justices as a way of addressing the political realities that you're all describing. That is not an especially popular idea right now, in part because it's associated with President Franklin Roosevelt's attempt at what is come down to be called court packing, as a response to the Supreme Court at the time refusing to uphold parts of the New Deal. I always feel at this moment obligated to mention something from a really good book about the Supreme Court and public opinion by Barry Friedman, which was that at the time, it wasn't at all clear that court packing was actually unpopular when FDR first announced it, but it has come down to us as corrupt, effectively, as one or two branches of government trying to kind of discredit and pound on the third one. So what do you think, Chris, about the future of the court? You know, if the justices issue really issue major decisions that make it appear that the law is just lurching to the right in a dramatic fashion, is that going to change the kinds of remedies that the country might be willing to accept?
Well, the question is, what do you mean by the country, right? Because I think that a certain portion of Democrats are probably there, but definitely not the institutional Democratic Party. It was very clear to me that Biden never had any interest in it. You don't even have the votes right now to get rid of the filibuster, which is far, far, far less a dramatic kind of institutional reform than adding seats to the Supreme Court would be. Look, I think that the gravity of American structural polarization pulls everything towards it in a way that will produce increasing pressure for these kinds of actions on the court. Right now, I think there is a thinking that I think is genuinely held, though to my mind probably wrongheaded, and I know Elie thinks extremely wrongheaded, that that essentially among the kind of Democratic Party elite and establishment, that upholding norms in some ways is part of the bulwark against the encroachments on our democratic health. And that if you get involved in essentially a race to the bottom, then you are unwinding, you're taking part in the kind of deconstruction of precisely the kind of structures that you need as bulwarks against what is, I think, acknowledged, I think, by most of the folks in that cohort, including the President of the United States, as like a genuine threat to American democracy as we've come to understand it. That said, I think that the political pressure from the bottom up is going to, it really depends on what the court does. And in some ways, the only silver lining here, I do think, to bring it back to what I was saying in the beginning, is in the same way that the understanding of the resolution that happens from so-called court packing, court expansion, court right-sizing in the New Deal is that there is a kind of, political settlement between the branches that shakes out the switch in time that says 9, the idea that like they kind of turn a corner on the New Deal jurisprudence, and that maybe the political pressure had something to do with that's contested in the literature, but the notion that there are political forces acting on the court. And I do think that part of the reason they are so touchy about criticism right now is that this idea looms out there. I do think that like the best case scenario, silver lining way to interpret this is that the threatened cudgel of intervention by the other political branches perhaps acts itself as some kind of check in restraining the branches from restraining the court and the courts from doing the worst things that they might be inclined to do.
If you are a Republican running for Senate and you are soft on the courts, you will lose. If you're a Republican running for president and you are soft on the courts, you will lose. You will not win your primary. If you're a Democrat running for president and you're soft on the courts, it does not matter yet. Biden was far and away the most hostile to court expansion, court reform, whatever you want to call it, and it didn't cost him a vote. It didn't cost him a vote in the primary, and he knew it, and that's why he's acting the way he's acting right now. It doesn't cost Dianne Feinstein a vote when she hugs Lindsey Graham. It doesn't cost Chris Coon a vote. It doesn't cost Joe Manchin a vote. It doesn't cost Kristen Sinema a vote to be soft on the courts and to be unwilling to do what is necessary to protect the democracy from the Republicans who have flooded the courts with their chosen people. Now, the only way that changes is when it starts costing these people, these politicians, these elected Democrats running for Senate. The only way it changes is when it starts costing them in the primary. And I think that we are some distance away from that, because the public, the Republicans and the media in general have done a really good job of framing the Overton window here and putting court expansion off to the side. So even the general public, when I talk about this a lot, they will say to me like, whoa, well, you know, Elie, if you expand the courts, then the Republicans are just going to expand it right back. And I'm well, how's that worse? They have 6-3 majority now. How is a 16-13 majority sometime in the future worse? Tell me how it's worse. They can't, but they've been trained to say like, but we have to be careful. So the Overton window is such that you are still pretty far away from getting enough people to even understand the courts, understand how it can be reformed, understand how it can be changed, and then to put pressure on their Democratic elected officials. The Republicans don't have this problem because they have spent a generation, and I've talked about this a lot, Republicans have spent a generation telling their voters, who are no smarter than the Democratic voters, it's the same kind of level of education, I think, about the courts in general, but they've spent a generation telling their voters that anything they don't like, they have to get the Supreme Court. You want your guns, you got to get the Supreme Court. You want to stop abortion, you got to get the Supreme Court. You don't like two men kissing each other at a restaurant, you got to get the Supreme Court. Republicans understand that, Democrats don't.
So, let's just be clear, and I'll be really quick here, that it's not been since Jimmy Carter where there has been an active lens from a Democratic president about the shaping of the courts. And Jimmy Carter was an expansionist president. And in fact, it's worth looking at his record, which most people don't. He put more women in the federal bench than any other president prior, all combined. And this included Black women as well. There's not been a president since that has gone at this with the level of kind of an analytical eye from at least a Democratic point of view than Carter did. And I mean every Democratic president since Carter.
Can I say one more thing? I just want to say that my monocausal theory of the asymmetry between the two coalitions that Elie is 100% correct about is Roe. It's the valence of Roe. I mean, I really think like that's the story, is that they have mobilized over 30 years around Roe, and they have it's a perfect marriage between the grassroots evangelical Christians and the corporate interests that want to get rid of basically the New Deal and go back to Lochner era. But the reason they've been able to get their grassroots is that it's about Roe, and liberals have been way more sort of copacetic because they were on the right side of Roe. And I think that's why what's about to happen is such an enormous inflection point, precisely because this defining issue, I think, is not just defined reproductive rights in this country. I think it has been the overwhelming thing defining grassroots small d Democratic politics around the court for essentially, decades.
I've done so many interviews with voters over the years in which they seem overwhelmed by the choices in front of them, and then they turn to abortion as something they have a clear, firm moral position on as a way to distinguish between candidates. I just want to give each of you a chance to make one final point, a lightning round, in what has been an excellent discussion. Elie, why don't you kick us off?
Oh, I was... my final lightning round point. Whatever you do in terms of court expansion, court reform, what have you, the thing where Democrats need to focus, where Alliance for Justice has already been focusing, is that we are due for a lower court expansion. The Judicial Conference has recommended at least 70 more judges at the district and circuit court level. We are overrun at that level in terms of just raw caseloads. And so even though it looks like actual Supreme Court expansion might be out of reach, we have to bear down and get meaningful lower court expansion going, because I promise you, if Mitch McConnell takes back the Senate and a Republican president wins in 2024, that is the first thing that they'll do. Not Supreme Court expansion. They will expand the lower courts because A, it's actually needed, and B, they can flood them with all of their justices. So if you don't get lower court expansion done now, today, now, then the Republicans are going to do it potentially in 2024.
Chris, you're nodding so vociferously that I'm calling on you next.
Well, I just, the last thing I would say is here's one more asymmetry that I think is really bedevils the Democratic Party and the center-left coalition. It was really remarkable how little Mitch McConnell and the Republican Party wanted to do with power on domestic policy. They tried to repeal Obamacare. That didn't work. a big corporate tax cut and top income level tax cut. That's what they do in every, that's always what they do. And then there was nothing else. And then effectively all they did was judges, because that's all they care about. That the ideology has been whittled so thin over there. The notion of some programmatic vision of what American domestic policy should look like is so skeletal that Mitch McConnell just clocks in, confirms judges, clocks out, sends them on recess, and did that for a year. Now, that makes it easier on their side, because the Democrats really do have a much larger, more ambitious substantive agenda in terms of like structuring American political economy. And you're seeing that play out now. I think this administration has been pretty proactive on judges, but again, it's competing for airtime and attention with like 5 other huge pieces of legislation they're trying to get passed. You don't have that on the other side, and that really does end up benefiting them in terms of their ability to focus on the courts.
Michele, take us out.
So what we're talking about are real life matters that actually affect people's lives. These are not just simply abstract commentaries that you've heard today. When we think about abortion, for example, with the Mississippi case that Elie brought us to, we're talking about a place in which there's only one abortion clinic in the state. When we're talking about Texas, it is so gutted reproductive health rights and justice that even if the Texas law is struck down, Texas is still considered the most deadly place in the developed world for a person to be pregnant. And that's not just Michele Goodwin saying this. When you look at the data from the CIA, as in Central Intelligence Agency, the United States ranks between 50th and 54th in the world in terms of maternal health and safety. It's actually safer to give birth in Saudi Arabia or Bosnia than in the United States. And when we look at this in terms of race, Black women are 3.5 times more likely than white women to die by carrying pregnancies to term. And those figures triple and quadruple depending upon what counties we're talking about in Mississippi, in Louisiana, and Texas. And so when we look at laws like SB 8, or we think about Dobbs, or when we think about voting rights, we're talking about fundamental issues that affect not only people's quality of life, but life or death itself. And let me just close with this. In Whole Women's Health v. Hellerstedt, a case from 2016 when the Supreme Court struck down 2 Texas anti-abortion laws, Justice Breyer quoted statistics from a study, a well-known study, that shows that a person is 14 times more likely to die by carrying a pregnancy to term than having an abortion. So you fit that in the conversation about Dobbs and also about SB 8. And what in the world could we possibly call that? Anything short of a death sentence that a state would impose, particularly on the most vulnerable and poor of people in its state. And that's a conversation that's really worth us not just having today, but continuing to have. And I thank you, Nan, for bringing this conversation to the fore, and also for being able to be in conversation with Chris and Elie, and also you, Emily.
Thank you, Michele. That is a lovely way to close out. Thank you to Alliance for Justice for putting this event together. It was smart and feisty, and in my view, that makes it a great tribute to Nan Aron. Thank you all so much for joining us.
Hello, I'm Paulette Meyer, and it's my honor to serve as AFJ's board chair. On behalf of the board, thank you for being with us to celebrate AFJ and the inimitable Nan Aron. Armed with endless energy and sound research and analysis, Nan has built a nonprofit that is a pillar of the progressive movement, and she's led it with wisdom, grace, humor, and humility. Against the backdrop of a well-financed opposition, she mobilized AFJ's 120 member organizations and led coalition efforts to fight for a free and open judiciary. Nan could teach a master class on relationship building, something that has always contributed to AFJ's success. That and her ability to share credit and suppress organizational ego in service to the cause. And she'd be the first to say that she wasn't in the trenches alone. Over the years, Nan assembled and mentored many brilliant staff members who worked side by side with her to make the vision a reality. Rest assured that Nan's legacy will continue to thrive for as long as it takes to protect our democracy and restore the independence and transparency to our judicial system. So it is with great fondness and enormous admiration that we thank Nan for her outstanding leadership and for her great gift to our country, the Alliance for Justice. Now, let's delve a little deeper into the world of this remarkable woman.
These were a bunch of clippings I had kept from about 2002, 2007. I love this one because it's all these powerful women.
And then they chose me.
Pelosi, Arianna Huffington, Hillary Clinton.
In those years, we and others fought.
I think a lot of people think that they know hardworking people, but they don't until they've met Nan Aron.
There were times when on the weekends, the family activity would be going to a rally or going to a march or visiting an immigration detention center on vacation. She poured her heart and soul into the Alliance and into the family and was able to do both. Is anyone on our side who's happy? Nan Aron, president of the Liberal Alliance.
She's unique in people who do this sort of work because of how much she cares.
For school, I had to do an interview for someone I knew, and I picked Nan because she was the most interesting person I knew. She doesn't like being called grandma, but we like to tease her about it sometimes.
Who knows what that's called?
A plant.
There you go.
Thank you. We love you, Grandma!
Growing up, I think our family was inextricably linked to AFJ. We would all leave notes on a notepad when somebody called and left a message, and that coincided with the Clarence Thomas hearings. And so I think I remember that notepad was actually subpoenaed.
When I think about my childhood, activism was also, a theme throughout. We would just be walking down the street and someone would honk at us. My mom would say, excuse me, the street belongs to the people, and march us directly down the middle of the street as slow as possible, screaming, the street belongs to the people. It would be no protest going on, no rally, but it was so much in her activist blood that it became part of me too. And the street belongs to the people.
Frankly, I wanted my kids to feel something of the fun and passion and excitement of working for social justice.
I first met Nan when we were in college at Oberlin College. My name is very similar to her last name with the difference of I have an S and she does not. She was both a live wire and a clear leader in college. We went to college during a time of the Vietnam War, and Nan was a clear leader and a clear politician in a sense.
When I graduated college and law school, it was, in effect, the beginning years of the women's rights movement. I was ready to lead an organization. I saw a real need.
She founded AFJ, and she also started a family around the same time, had 3 kids, and those 3 kids have now gone on to create their own families. And I think that legacy is just as important as her legacy at AFJ.
1, 2, 3. One of the things that makes me proud about Nan is that she has chosen to use the law as a tool to accomplish what she wanted to do for those underserved and those in need of representation.
I'm most proud that my mom was able to be a strong mother and also have this really meaningful, important career. That was something that was really striking to see, her be able to balance both.
This is certainly a remarkable moment.
I think the legacy is really what you see in the country today. In some ways, having watched the organization and her grow together, it's hard to imagine the organization without her, but I think it's so important that it carry on without her and that other people take over the helm, because for everything that she cared so much about to continue, there needs to be people there who care as passionately as she did.
I feel like I'm the luckiest person in the world to have been able to do this for as long as I've been able to. We need to be around to ensure that we can amass a group of people around the country to speak up and speak out and fight back.
I wanted to add my tremendous aloha and thanks to Nan for her years of advocacy, 42 years in creating and leading the Alliance for Justice.
Nan, I want to congratulate you on your retirement and thank you for everything you have done for our country and our community.
It is an absolute honor to celebrate you, Nan, to celebrate your leadership, your commitment to justice, and most of all, your service in building powerful infrastructure.
I'm so incredibly grateful for Nan's leadership, for the existence of Alliance for Justice, for the Boulder Advocacy Program.
Congratulations, Nan. Thank you on behalf of all of us that care about the courts and are involved in the day-to-day fight to keep our rights preserved.
You are a brilliant advocate for justice, a true guardian of democracy. Thank you, Nan, for the work you have done and will do.
In gatherings of AFJ, when the staff came over, I would, especially if there were staff with children, I would be asked to perform a bit of magic. I thought I'd ask my assistant to come over here, say a few magic words, and pull the magic cord. And this is what the color and length of influence we hope Nan will have over time.
Thank you, Paulette, and to everyone for the kind words. All of our speakers and panelists have left me with so much inspiration and hope. Hope that if we seize this critical moment, we can galvanize voters in the midterm elections and continue moving our society boldly forward. Today, we take notice of my stepping down from leadership of Alliance for Justice, but also the exciting beginning of a new era under the leadership of Rakim Brooks. Let me tell you, this has been an incredible ride. I'm excited for this new chapter and know that he's the right person to lead the next phase of AFJ's work. As some of you know, Alliance for Justice began rather modestly in a clinic at Georgetown Law School over a bar. That's not the bar of justice, but a bar that served law students copious amounts of alcohol. Starting at 4:00 in the afternoon, and as customers came in for a drink, it grew harder and harder to hear yourself think. There were only two of us, an assistant and myself, and lots of students to help with projects. We've come a long way since then. Today, our staff of over 40 in DC, Texas, and California is, I'm happy to say, going strong. And our flagship programs, Justice and Boulder Advocacy, are inextricably linked to increasing equity and participation in our democracy. The few of us who gathered together to fight back in the 1980s, those early years, never expected what we'd face in the decades that followed. More than 24 years of Republican presidents bent on picking judges, very ultra-conservative ones. To this day, as we all witnessed during the 4 years of the Trump administration, Republicans used the promise of these judges to pump up their far right-wing base and win elections. We know that change doesn't happen in a day or even a year. The struggle for civil rights, gun safety, abortion, and so many issues takes time. These times, though, when the tides are against us, made us stronger. It's like that Sam Cooke song. It's been a long time coming, but I know change gonna come. Yes, it will. And we've already seen the winds of change shift a bit. The Senate has confirmed more judges than it has in years. And what we pushed so hard for during previous Democratic administrations, demographic and experiential diversity is becoming a reality. Public defenders, civil and workers' rights, and plaintiffs' lawyers are getting judgeships. It's a huge change. AFJ was instrumental in making this happen, along with the 35 organizations in our Building the Bench program. Moreover, polls showed that more Democrats than Republicans now care about the courts, an historic reversal from the past. These are all signs pointing to real progress. I'm often asked how I stayed motivated in this fight for the last 42 years. I like to say that social justice advocates, lawyers, and organizations are there for all seasons. During bad years, you offer hope, spirit, and resistance. During good years, you make sure we don't let down our guard. I know you will all keep fighting in the halls of Congress and in state houses around the country. And I'll still be there with you. Returning to the place where I began at Georgetown Law School, I'll be teaching. And from my post in the academic world, we'll keep the flame burning. What we heard from Stacey, and I think this bears repeating, is that social justice is a team sport. It's what makes AFJ's Boulder Advocacy Program so vital to advancing the causes we all care about. And the best way to do that is to better arm nonprofits, whether they're foundations or smaller grassroots organizations, with the tools they need to advocate for their communities and causes they know best. At AFJ, we're doing that work by some measure, which could be thought of as behind the scenes. But the reward comes from knowing that our collective efforts touch the lives of so many in this country, most of whom will never see or know. They certainly won't know us, but their fortunes and all of our fortunes, by extension, will be lifted up by what we do. There's an increasing awareness among our constituents and among young people in particular of how important this work is. I know everyone here tonight already understands why AFJ and our partner organizations are so vital to securing and expanding all of our rights. I can't close without a few very important thank yous. First, thank you to the board and our former board chairs, and specifically Paulette and Norm Rosenberg, who led the board during this period, and the success of the smooth transition to AFJ's new president, Rakim Brooks. It says so much about their dedication. Naturally, I want to thank the incredible team at AFJ, the people without whom none of this progress would be possible. It takes passion, resiliency, and ongoing motivation to do this critical and rewarding work. I'm honored to have moved the needle towards democracy alongside each of you. You're changing the course of history. Keep up the great work. Of course, I want to also thank my family, which has shared the pleasures and challenges of the past 42 years. My husband, my adult children, and siblings. I also want to thank my supportive and enthusiastic grandchildren. I hope their generation does not have to fight these same battles and will benefit from the hard work of AFJ and like-minded organizations and individuals. Last but certainly not least, I'd like to thank you, supporters and friends of AFJ. Without your continued support, we cannot do what must be done. Thank you so much for what you've given in good times and not so good times. We persevere. We know we won't win every fight and hard challenges lie ahead, but I know that together we'll continue to make the most of every moment because the stakes are so high. And because years from now, we can say these were times when people began to find fairness again when they walked in a courtroom. It's a moment when they began to find a greater commitment to compassion and equality. And so to leave you with a saying by A.A. Milne that I recently found on the wall of a public school while hanging out in a playground with my granddaughter. It goes like this: how lucky am I to have something that makes saying goodbye so hard. Well, thank you all for accompanying me on this amazing journey. And now I'll hand it back to DeRay and Rakim to close out this special evening.
How's everybody feeling? Are you inspired? I'm inspired because for more than 42 years, let that sink in, y'all, for more than 42 years, Nan has worked to make sure that the judiciary is working in people's best interests, to make sure that there are fair and impartial judges on the bench, even when other people aren't paying attention. 42 years. And now it's your responsibility, it's my responsibility, it's all of our responsibility to carry the torch. I'd like to ask Rakim to come join me in helping to close out this powerful event. Rakim?
Thanks, DeRay. And thanks to all of you who are here tonight. The courts are now, more than ever, on the front lines of the fight for our democracy. And you stepped up. So thank you again to those who have supported this work with boots on the ground or through donations that allow us to stay in this fight. I hope you'll encourage others to join you. 2022 is not too far away, and here at AFJ, we are committed to ensuring that the Biden administration fills every single judicial vacancy with progressive judges, thereby rebalancing our courts in favor of equal justice and against wealth and privilege. As you saw tonight, our organization is as strong as ever, but our democracy, unfortunately, is not. And that is why we need your continued support. Again, we want to place more progressive judges on the federal bench than ever before. Judges that support abortion rights, voting rights, workers' rights, immigrants' rights, and of course, our environment. We want to take back our courts because they're ours and to ensure a better future. So please make a donation in honor of Nan or someone who has inspired you to keep fighting. You can do that right away by texting boldly forward to 44-321. We are ready to act boldly. I'm ready to act boldly and to move boldly forward. And with your support, we will.
Everybody, thanks so much for coming tonight, and we have one more surprise for you. Have a good night.
Hello. As Speaker of the House, it is my honor to bring greetings from your many friends in Congress to the partners, members, and friends of Alliance for Justice this evening for this virtual celebration. After more than 40 years of AFJ's leadership in the fight for justice, we pause tonight in reflection and celebration as we both honor your fearless founder and salute AFJ's growth into the powerful force that it is today. Indeed, Nan Aron embodies the spirit of public service. From her early days at the ACLU to her service at the EEOC to her decades at the helm of AFJ, Nan has put her legal brilliance, relentless work ethic, and strong progressive voice to work on behalf of the American people. And in doing so, she has helped move our nation toward our founder's vision of a fair, independent judiciary, one that upholds the distinctly American promise of equal justice under law. Nan, your many friends in Congress salute you for all that you have achieved in your impressive tenure. And we thank you, as well as the entire team at AFJ, for being a valued partner in the fight for justice, helping fill the federal bench with smart, qualified judges, and helping us fight back against unfit nominees. This work is especially crucial now as President Biden and the Democratic Congress work to repair the damage to the federal judiciary done by the former administration, and as we work to fight back against a tide of partisanship and extremism in the courts. Together, after the Supreme Court's devastating action on SB 8, we will finally enshrine the essential protections of Roe v. Wade into law. Together, as state lawmakers escalate their assault on the right to vote, we'll advance historic voting rights legislation. And together, as we confront the climate crisis, a pandemic, systemic racism, economic inequality, and more, we will build back better and forge progress not seen in over 50 years. On behalf of the United States Congress, I look forward to our continued partnership under your new president, Rakim Brooks, who has dedicated his career to defending our Constitution as a public interest attorney at the ACLU, on the Biden-Harris transition team, and now at AFJ. With your partnership, we will carry on the fight to move our nation boldly forward toward a brighter, fairer future for our children. Congratulations, Nan, and best wishes for a happy and healthy next chapter. Thank you for all that you have done. To the entire AFJ team, congratulations on your more than 4 decades of success, and best wishes for a wonderful celebration. Thanks to you also.
Congratulations, Nan.
Congratulations, Nan.
Congratulate you on your well-earned retirement.
Congratulations on an incredible career.
Congratulations on your retirement.
Congratulations, Nan, on over 4 decades at the helm of AFJ.
We wish Nan the best of luck and the best of everything.
Thank you. Congratulations on reaching the next chapter of your life.
Congratulations on all of what you've accomplished, and you've touched so many of us.
Thank you for all the incredible work you've done, and thank you for reminding us all that we don't just get a democracy, we have to make one.
Nan is fearless. She is a staunch advocate for working families and their unions. No one, and I mean no one, can intimidate Nan from speaking out for fairness and justice.
And Nan is like a fire, burning brightly at the forefront of every campaign for justice through every season.
She makes you feel like you are a meaningful part of the office.
She's warm, engaging, strategic, persistent, and tough. She's willing to compromise, but not on core principles, and has always worked to push allies to be their best selves.
When the world was falling down around us, Nan stood strong. Nan taught me to never be afraid to ask for help, because we all need support sometimes.
I couldn't, I wouldn't be where I'm at without Nan. That relationship with her has been tremendous.
She evinced honesty, integrity, compassion, and great judgment, traits that she has exhibited in all of her personal and professional life.
I have never known anybody who has been more succinct in how they express themselves, more gracious in their manner.
Nan just starts pulling out her Tupperware from her lunch and putting shrimp into her Tupperware to take home. She was like, they have shrimp.
To seeing the unlimited amount of energy and determination that you have and have had since I've known you since 2007, to building a diverse, progressive bench.
I was amazed at your leadership and everything you brought to the table. I was always proud to be on the front lines there with you.
She is obsessed with public transportation, travel that is good for the environment, right?
You're right. I need to get one of those.
Nan has been slaying the political dragons. For 42 years, she's been a leading light in the areas of civil liberties, civil and human rights.
You gave me the chance to move into your space and open the West Coast office. And that turned out to be a life-changing move for me.
The wilderness and endangered species of the world thank you as well. Without your help in the mid-'80s and '90s with the Ninth Circuit, a lot would have been lost.
Made sure to note to myself that this is a Nan lesson, that rain or shine, the show must go on. So she made sure it happened for all of us.
You always reminded us that even though we didn't win the fight, they always knew the Alliance for Justice was in the fight. Thank you, Nan, for your dedication to the justice world.
Nan is beloved and admired by everyone who believes in equal access to justice and who, like the sign says in part, believes science is real, love is love, and kindness is everything.
I am so inspired by that leadership that you have demonstrated over the years that I've known you.
She's made the Alliance into a powerfully effective central group on judicial selection issues.
She's transformed the way 2 generations of lawyers and nonprofits think about advocacy. She's made us bolder. She's challenged us.
I've learned a lot of important life lessons, work lessons, and just can never thank you enough for the opportunities you have given me.
All the times that you pulled us all together and made us feel like a community and like we could change things in the world. I don't know how to thank you for that.
Thank you so much, Nan, for being a great inspiration. As a communications director, working for Nan was wonderful.
I'm grateful to have had the chance to work with you as a colleague and a friend, and for many lessons you have taught me and countless others about a judicial system that is all too often rigged in favor of the powerful and the privileged.
Thank you, Nan, for your leadership, friendship, and for directing traffic. Your influence extends beyond Washington, D.C.
She was a trailblazer, a pioneer. She pushed forward for a fair and independent judiciary that truly represents all Americans.
Aron has never met a barrier that she won't break down and then properly sort and recycle or dispose of.
Nan was my first mentor in DC. She was my first boss in DC after I moved from New York City. And Nan means the world to me.
I think you more than anyone taught me advocacy, taught me the law and media and political world of DC, and really shaped what my career has been.
I learned from Nan how to build coalitions, how to identify and get the right people on your side in order to advance the issue that you need to move forward.
And in our time together, you taught me invaluable lessons about leading with principle, fighting the hard, good fights.
Nan does this work because she cares about people. Nan, your efforts over the years have made our country a better place.
Thank you for building AFJ into the credible organization that it is around the country, the useful, important, valuable organization it is.
Nan is loyal, supportive, a visionary, inspirational, caring, and brilliant.
Thank you for trusting us to expand the Boulder Advocacy Program to a state that truly needs it. I will forever be grateful for your support and for your vision.
She's just a wonderful role model, and the nonprofit, public interest, Courts Matter world has been so well served.
You can rest assured, Nan, you've done your job, and you've invested in leaders who will continue to carry the torch and light the path towards a more just and equitable America.
Our friend, our leader, our teacher, our Nan for all seasons.
Congratulations on your retirement, Nan. I hope you can finally get some rest now.
We're so grateful for all you have done, Nan.
We love you, Nan, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you, Nan, for all that you've done for the social justice community and for women in the legal profession.
Thank you for everything.
Thank you, Nan, and congratulations.
Congratulations on a well-deserved retirement.
Thank you, and congratulations on retiring.